welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're doing a follow-up on my Osborne EB-3 miter gauge for my table saw related to the issue of when I got where the miter gauge ended up beyond the T-track, that when I pulled it back the end would actually catch on the T-track. So I had a chance to follow up with the company and they actually mailed me a special little package here. I apologize for being a couple days late with this, and of what they think might be a solution for me. So I got this nice envelope here, conversed with the president of the company. Very happy with their customer service. I can't complain about that. Just to make things clear, I did not receive this miter gauge as a gift or for review. I bought this off Amazon with my own money, on my own time, and so there's no special treatment here because I got some sort of favored review status. So in the envelope, after talking with them, their suggestion was we'll try some spacers. So let's open the envelope up here and see what they mailed. Okay, so inside the envelope there was no letter, just a couple of spacers here. And so based on our on our email exchange, that these spacers, and I don't know how many of them it's going to take, because it might vary based on the saw, can be placed on the end where the ring is here underneath it to give that a little bit of lift. And so we're going to start here by undoing the bolt there, and then we're going to open up the package that Osborne sent me, and we'll try, they sent 4, so we'll start with maybe 2 spacers and see if that makes a difference. Okay, here with 2 spacers. They did send 4, just for the record. We'll slide that through and then bolt this back on to the EB-3. Okay, that's with 2. So let's put this back in the track and see how it works. Okay, this is with 2. Looks like that may not be enough because I'm still binding up here on the back end of the cut. You know, it's interesting when I look at this, when I press down on it here with my hand, now it's binding up still if I square this up that way. Maybe that's better now. And so that's still got the binding problem. I might try all 4 and see what we get. Okay, now with all 4 attached, let's put this back in the slot and see how she performs. There you go at the end. If I do this loosely, it looks like with the 4, that's about enough to be able to keep it at least far enough down on that hook that it'll come back. It's still not as slick as maybe as I would like, but it definitely works better that the miter gauge will come back. So it looks like adding the 4 washers was indeed a valid fix. So one of the concerns I have about the EB-3 extra washers is still in regards to how flat it's going to make for the miter gauge shoe and how that might affect cuts such as a dado blade, where you're really looking at the depth of the cut and not just the fact that you're cutting through. If you're talking about a through cut, just cutting pieces to width or length or ripping it, I'm not sure that this matters, but if you're making a dado that you want a very specific depth, I've got some concern at how the EB-3, even with the extra washers, is going to work to make that happen and to ensure the accuracy of it. So what I've got rigged up here is I've got a dial indicator here set on my table saw here, rigged up with a bunch of clamps on the side under here. So as I move my miter gauge forward and back, I can see the change in the reading on the dial. as well as when the miter gauge is picked up or pushed down, even with the washers on the front, to see what kind of impact that actually has on the cut. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push my hand on the handle, and I'm going to zero out my dial indicator somewhere about there. Okay, so now my dial is zeroed out, and so if I pull my miter, my EB-3 back towards where those shims were at it, we went up about 4 thousandths of an inch. 2, 3, 4 thousandths of an inch on that edge of the miter bar. Altogether, we've got an error somewhere around about 6, 7 thousandths of an inch. As I get closer to the fence, the gauge is going up further. So we're looking at somewhere around maybe, and back on the other side is 0. Wow, that's up to 20 now. So 25 thousandths of an inch. And it's also affected by whether my hand is on or off of the push handle. I take my handle off the push handle. You see that goes up to 10 thousandths of an inch. I put my hand on it. Just a simple act of pushing my hand on the handle will rock the miter gauge enough. I put my hand on the fence. You can see the dial indicator jumps about 15 thousandths of an inch just by making that jump right there on the gauge. So compared to what it would be baseline, there's an extra bit of rock and play there. But the next little thing, just for comparison purposes here, if I leave the 0 position on the gauge, and then I back up my miter gauge, and then I slide my contraption here over onto the cast iron table, now the gauge reads about 3 thousandths of an inch. So there's just where this gauge does sit, where there is a slight difference between the top of the bar, even when I've got my handle on it, and the top of the table surface here. And so if I put my handle down, or if I grab the handle on the EB-3 firmly, and then I slide my dial indicator over from the tabletop onto the bar, that's close to 0. And then now when I rotate it onto the cast iron, we're somewhere about 2 thousandths or so higher than the top, where there's a slight difference between the surface here and the bar. And so ultimately with that difference, particularly right here at the front face of the fence of the EB-3, it's fairly negligible if your dados are closer to this, but there's going to be a slight taper to your dados as you get farther away from that fence, as you go back, just due to the effect of the extra washers at the end of the EB-3, as well as how much downward force you're applying to the miter bar. So what I'd like to see, or a modification I might try to do, is see if I can add a couple extra washer holes on the back end of this miter gauge. Because if there could be another slot back here on the back side with some washers, that would help to hold it down and keep it from rocking. Because you can see even with the washers on it, I've got quite a bit of play here. Now if I lift the far left side of the fence here, we're going from about -2 to somewhere around about 17 or 18 thousandths. So about 20 thousandths, or about 2/100ths of an inch difference in play. Subtract off the difference between that and the tabletop, and we're at about 18 thousandths of an inch, or about 0.018 inches, which hopefully for most woodworking projects is within your margin of error. But I think it's just good to be aware of where your sources of error are coming from on the tools that you're working with. So as you think about your EB-3, make sure you think about how you're holding the gauge to minimize your error on dado cuts. Again, if you're not doing dados, this isn't going to be a big deal, but if you're running a batch of dados and your depth really matters, make sure you pay attention to how you're holding your EB-3 and your setup, because as my dial indicator shows, there's definitely still some error even with the washers at the end for what that's affecting on the accuracy of the gauge. So I hope you found this useful, and have a great day. Bye.